Previously on Sake Revolution.
Let me ask you this. We've been talking about these affordable but yummy sakes. What are your thoughts on treating yourself to a really expensive sake? And by that, I mean $80 or more.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's first sake podcast. I'm your host, John Puma from the Sake Notes, also the administrator over at the Internet Sake Discord, the guy on the show who is not a sake samurai. I'm just the, bougie sake nerd like the rest of you.
And I am your host, Timothy Sullivan. I am a sake samurai. I'm also a sake educator, as well as the founder of the Urban Sake website. And every week, John and I will be tasting and chatting about all things sake and doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand.
That is absolutely right, Tim. Now, this is sort of the second part of a two-parter in a way. So last week, we tasted and found some inexpensive sakes. We challenged ourselves to find some very tasty, low-price sakes. We were aiming for as close to $20 or below as we can get. You actually found a $19 bottle of sake that you had a wonderful time with, and I found a $22 bottle of sake that is something I kind of had in my back pocket for just such an episode coming down the line eventually. But this week, we're going in the exact opposite direction.
We couldn't help but ask ourselves, if we're enjoying these bargain brews, what's the other side of the coin? What if we spent more money and went a little more luxury? Would we get more enjoyment out of it? So our task this week was to find a bougie brew, a sake that is more expensive, and our target was $80 or over.
But not going into like the $2, $3, $4 plus $100 bottles that we know are out there.
There are some out there.
But we wanted to keep it a little bit constrained because at the end of the day, we buy our own sake for the show most of the time.
Yes, we do. Yeah, and I think that spending 80 to 100 plus is reasonable for a special occasion sake, don't you think? Special occasion.
So the Super Bowl, I guess, right? Is that the occasion we're celebrating?
Or a start of a new year.
Start of a new year.
Or someone's birthday is this month.
True.
I have to ask you right away. So how much did you end up spending on your bougie sake, John?
My bougie sake came in at $110. I went with one of my favorite breweries, and I've actually never had this sake from them before. So this is so I brought along the Dewa Zakura Junmai Daiginjo Genshu. In the US, they call this the Captain's Table. I do not know exactly why they call it the Captain's Table. Maybe we can reach out to somebody over there and get an answer on that at some point. We'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, this is a little unusual because it's at that super premium price point, Junmai Daiginjo, but a Genshu. So a little bit different, a little bit unusual. And again, I think it's probably the only product they sell in the US that I haven't tried yet. And this was the perfect excuse for me to have some sips of it, and perhaps an entire bottle at some point.
Yeah.
What about you, Tim? What did you bring along?
Well, I found a sake that is clocking in at $138.
Ooh.
So that's on the high end for a sake. It really is. Mm-hmm. But I was able to pick up Otokoyama Junmai Daiginjo. This is a sake that's been produced for about 50 years. So it's got a long history, and it is an award-winning sake. It's from Hokkaido, from the Otokoyama brewery. That means man's mountain.
Yeah. Otokoyama, kind of known for making drier stuff. So this will be interesting to see how this pans out and what we get out of this one.
Now, when you think ultra premium sake, John, what do you think of? Like, what's your quintessential ultra premium sake, $100 or more? What's your expectation?
My thought immediately goes to, we're going to see some weird milling percentages. Like, you're going to see things that are kind of low. Another thing that I thought of, and this was something that I had considered after last week's episode, is that not all rice is created equal. So last week, my Tatsumigura was a 50% milled Gyohaku Mangoku, but it was still a bottle of sake that was only costing me $22. How can this be? And there's more than one grade of rice field. And so for these more premium rice fields, you may pay more for it, or you will pay more for it. So in my head, maybe I'm thinking that for this Tatsumigura, they got some maybe lower grade Gyohaku Mangoku and milled it down to 50% to kind of offset it. And boom, you've got this really reasonably priced, very, very delicious sake. Again, that's my thought. I'm trying to piece together what could have possibly happened to bring the price down so low. What do we know about the grades of these rice fields?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first of all, it must be graded. What they do is they look at 1,000 grains and they check how many of those grains are cracked, how many of the grains are malformed or green, not fully grown. And then they can assign a grade to that batch of sake rice. And as a brewer, you can buy Gohyaku Mangoku or Yamada Nishiki at different grades. And for premium sake, there's 3 major grades. So you can think of it as top class, middle class, and entry-level class for 3 different grades of premium sake rice.
And I imagine that your very super premium daiginjos, like we're going to be tasting today, almost certainly are using those very high-end rice fields.
Yeah, the big kahuna is Yamada Nishiki that is grown in Hyogo Prefecture. Hyogo is the home base, ground zero for the most expensive sake rice you can buy. So chances are when I think of premium sake, I'm thinking of a brewery that's going to be using wherever they are in Japan. I mean, my brewery is for today is in Hokkaido, which is in the far, far north. And I happen to know that this Otokoyama Junmai Daiginjo that I'm tasting today uses 100% top grade Yamada Nishiki from Hyogo.
I actually looked up, let me rephrase that. I actually tried to look up the source of the rice for mine, both on the English and Japanese sites for Dewa Zakura and their importer. But unfortunately, I was not able to track down the origin of the rice that's used here. Found a whole lot of awards, though. We'll get into that in a little bit when we start tasting, though.
All right. Well, I think that when people do get their hands on a super, super expensive Junmai Daiginjo or Daiginjo sake, I know that for me, my expectations have been a little bit too high in the past. Has that ever happened to you?
I probably, because you want to justify that cost. So you're expecting it to be like the greatest thing that you've ever tasted. I do expect one of the major factors to be mouthfeel. I think it's going to be, I always think of something really silky and luxurious on the palate that just kind of lingers a little bit longer than a regular sake would. That's kind of the idea that I have going into this sort of thing.
Yeah, being in the sake business, I've had the good fortune of going to a lot of restaurants in Japan and special dinners and things like that. And sometimes I've been served a sake where I've been told, oh, this is so exclusive. This is a sake that you can only get once a year. They only make 20 bottles and it's $5,000 a bottle. And we're going to give you a taste. And you taste it and you're like, you expect your life to change from that one sip. And you're like, oh, it tastes really good. But would I pay $5,000 a bottle? I don't know if I could do that.
I have a story about this, or I've had a similar experience to this. I was in a bar in Tokyo one year. I was on vacation, and they had a very exclusive, very special sake that I thought I would never be able to taste again. And one glass of it was 6,300 yen. At the time was about $60. And I was like, I'm on vacation. I'm going to live however, I'm going to go for it. And I drank it, and I was like, this is, to date, the best sake I've ever had. It is also very much not worth $60 for this glass that I'm drinking out of. I had those two thoughts at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And you might think that they're conflicting, but they're very complementary, and very much like you can have the best sake you've ever had and say this is still way too much for normal consumption.
Right. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I think it really boils down to wanting to have good experiences, and sometimes it's worth it to pay a little more, have a great experience, and have that special occasion. I'm all for that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It is also important to remember that compared to the wine world, I don't know if you've looked at a high-end wine list in an upscale restaurant recently, but there are bottles that go for $10,000 and up, and they might laugh at $60 a glass as like nothing. So compared to the wine world, I think you get an incredible bargain when you get expensive sakes. Would you agree with that? Or am I crazy?
I don't dip into that part of the wine world too much because my appreciation for wine is not what my appreciation for sake is.
Mm-hmm.
But I've definitely, in the before times, I've definitely seen wine lists that were impressive with the number of digits they can fit into a bottle price.
Yes. Yeah. And there's a market for that.
Oh, I'm sure, else they wouldn't be on the menu. I've been to places where there's sections of multi-$1,000 bottles. And I'm like, that's great for somebody else. What's the house wine?
The market needs both extremes. They need affordable sakes for people just getting started. They need middle-of-the-road sakes, and there's a demand for specialized, small batch, very expensive sakes as well. And I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't want to pass any judgment about sakes at any level of the price range.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But it's really fun to taste the expensive ones.
Right. Or at least that's what we're expecting in a few minutes.
That's what we're expecting today.
So Tim, let's open up that Hokkaido treat of yours.
Yes. Let's go up north. Okay, so I'm drinking the Otokoyama Junmai Daiginjo. This is from Otokoyama Sake Brewery in Hokkaido. The alcohol is 16%. Our rice milling rate, the amount that we polish the rice down, is 38% remaining. Our SMV is +5, and the acidity is 1.3. So this Junmai Daiginjo is going to be really interesting to taste. Yeah, and at 38% is it's in that super premium area. That's nice. Yeah. And again, our cost here was $138 US. I'm going to open this up. All right. And let's pour this into the glass. Is that a box? Oh, is it a box? Let me show you. And for those of you listening in, please check our show notes, sakerevolution.com. So, John, look at the box this came in. This is a cloth-covered display box, very beautiful. It has chrysanthemum, kind of like a silk fabric cover to it. Yeah. And when you open it up, it's got this red fabric lining. And there's a number of brochures in here as well. That is luxurious, Tim. Yes. It's got a list of all the awards it's won from 1977 up until 2019. And there's a history of Otokoyama Brewery here, all in Japanese. Got some woodblock prints in there. And this looks like a formal letter, Japanese-style letter, which I believe, says, thank you for buying this sake. Signed, Otokoyama Brewery. Well, I've got this in the glass. It looks very lovely and silky in the glass. I'm using a nice wine glass so I can appreciate all the different color and sparkle of this sake. Let's give it a smell. All right, interesting. I have to be honest with you. I was expecting this to be a super fruity extravaganza, but the aromas I'm getting are actually more floral. Like I'm getting some lilac and maybe some white flower, a little bit of fruitiness, but it's really restrained. So it's like kind of a floral bouquet type of smell. Really lovely and not common in sake at all. So let me give this a taste. Okay, no doubt about it. This ultra premium sake is very silky smooth. Again, not a fruit bomb, not a fruit explosion. The finish actually lingers quite a bit, but it's a drier finish. So we're not getting the sweetness and that richness. So I think this is a very unique ultra premium sake. And it's important to remember that this won its first award in 1977.
1977?
Yes.
What kind of sake awards were we doing in 1977?
Well, there's this, not a competition, but there's this organization called the Monde Selection.
Okay.
M-O-N-D, Monde Selection. And you can submit products and wines and foods and beverages to this organization, and they will judge quality. And they won a gold prize in 1977. It was actually the first sake to ever be awarded at this Monde Selection.
Oh, that sounds interesting. That sounds bougie. That sounds appropriate.
Yeah.
That's on brand for what we're doing today.
So this has been around since 1977.
At the least.
At least, yes. I would imagine that this is not the modern style of ultra premium sake. This is more of a traditional drier style, and it's absolutely delicious. But I have to be honest, I was prejudiced thinking if you spend over $100, over $130 on a sake, they're going to hand you that fruit salad in the face. Boom, like it's just going to be overtly fruity, super velvety, super rich. That kind of like classic idea of what a super premium sake is all about. But this kind of tricked me a little bit. It's very lovely, light, balanced, but the finish is drier than I expected, I have to be honest.
Wow.
Really nice though, and really engaging aroma. But it's delicate. It's delicate for sure.
Nice. Very interesting. Very cool.
Well, that's a little bit about my man's mountain, my Otokoyama. Over to you, John. I am so curious about this Deiwa Zakura.
This is the Deiwa Zakura Junmai Daiginjo Genshu Captain's Table. It's using the Yamada Nishiki, milled down to 45%, so not too low. The alcohol percentage is 17%. As I mentioned, this is a Genshu. Acidity is 1.3, and the sake meter value is +4. Bear with me a moment. We've got a bit of a ribbon to untie here. I don't have a fancy box, but I do have a nice fancy ribbon.
Is that a gold tassel I see?
Yeah. So the tassel, and then a paper cover over the cap. And I open that up. And right away, I'm getting that fruit bomb.
All right. We have fruit bomb, ladies and gentlemen.
So yeah, the bottle isn't particularly close to my nose, but I can still detect the aroma from here. And I remember we talked about aroma on the show a while back, and that's one of the things. How far back can you be and still get that aroma? The answer here is very. and it's lovely. It's that ripe fruit aroma that you expect from a nice sake like this. And in Deiwa Zakura fashion, it favors cherry a little bit. Yeah. So, as mentioned, and now I'm kind of bringing my nose closer to the glass, it definitely has that going on in spades. There is a tiny bit of alcohol on the nose also, but that's not too surprising because we are dealing with a 17% Genshu. Again, very unusual. but it's really balanced out by the fruitiness of the aroma. So the taste is definitely fruity. It's not as bomb as some other ones I've had. It's not as overt. The taste is actually a little bit lighter than I was expecting. Balanced out nicely with the fruit, and then has a little bit of a bite on the finish. Yeah, but the rock star here is the texture. This is so silky smooth through all of it. Again, it is light. It is fruity. It has a little bit of almost a richness that's in the finish. That's that bite I was mentioning. And it lingers longer than a crisp sake, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's again, that is also really nicely balanced. It all feels very purposeful, like they constructed this flavor as tasting experience. And yeah, I mean, this is very nice. This feels like experiential. This feels very purposeful. Like there was a beginning and middle and end that they had in mind. This is sipping sake. This is not, I don't think I would put this in front of food, especially not at the price point, but just very, very nice. I don't think I mentioned though, this is actually aged also at, I believe, -5 degrees centigrade for about a year. So that's going to bring some, a little mellowness to it also. It's probably why it's not as overtly fruity as a lot of their other stuff. This is very nice. And speaking of awards, this sake won the 2019 Kura Master Platinum.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Kura Master is that it's French sommeliers who judge.
Really?
Yeah, they're all French sommeliers who judge the sakes as if they're wines. So it's a different type of competition.
Interesting.
So, John, let me ask you this. This is just something that popped into my head. I was just thinking, what do you think your reaction would be if you had one of these ultra premium $100 plus sakes as your first sake ever?
Well, all right. The question, do I know the cost?
I would say no, and you're not paying for it. Someone just slides a glass across the bar and says, try this. And you're being treated. And this is the first sake you ever have, something like what we're drinking today. What do you think your reaction would be?
Well, it probably would have accelerated my entry into sake nerddom, for sure. The first sake I ever had was a Hakatsuru Draft, which is very much on the other end of the spectrum. I believe that's a Futsushu. And I wonder if it would have discouraged me because I eventually would have found out how much this is. And in my head, I might get like an anchor pricing because this would be an anchor taste, right? It would tell me like, this is what sake is supposed to taste like.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And then I go, okay, this is what sake is supposed to taste like. What's sake supposed to cost? $110.
Right.
Maybe this isn't the hobby for me. That might have been something that came out of that. But it's hard. It's so hard to know what would happen if you went back. Well, what about you?
I think that my experience back then, if I had had a sake like this, I would have compared it immediately to wine. It has that little bit of fruitiness. It has that texture. It has that longer finish. I think my brain would have tried to compute what I was tasting and it would have said, oh, this is like a wine. And I don't think I would have been as blown away by it. The first sake I did end up having was a dry, clean, smooth sake. And what caught my attention, I remember very distinctly, is that my brain didn't know where to go with it. It was a taste I had never had before. And I was like, it does not compute what's going on. This is amazing. And that really grabbed my attention. So I'm kind of glad I didn't have a super ultra premium fruit bomb sake as my first one.
So yeah, yours does have that wine-like quality, which I can imagine you gravitating towards comparing it to wine. For me, this fruitiness is something that is unique to sake, in the manner that it appears in high fruit sakes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I obviously wouldn't have made that wine connection. I might have just been sad that something this delicious is so expensive.
Does it set you up for disappointment for the rest of your life if nothing measures up to that?
That would have been really unfortunate if it was. But it's entirely possible also that it would have led me to trying to find affordable sake that can deliver an experience like that. And while I don't think you can quite get this flavor at that lower price point, it definitely would have been a challenge. So that might have been up for trying to do. But I don't know. Yeah. If you have this amazing sake, and every other sake is going to be trying to chase that, is that a bad thing? Is that discouraging or is that encouraging? What kind of effect does that have on somebody? We need to find somebody who's never had sake before and do that. Just do an experiment. We get one person futsushu and the other person like super premium daiginjo and see and just send them out into the world and see what happens next.
Something just popped into my mind.
What's that?
I've had that same sake many times. The first sake that I ever had, I've had it many times, and it never is exactly the same because your location's different, your mood is different, what you're eating's different. If you have a great first sake experience, I think it's really hard to recapture that moment no matter what you're drinking,
That's entirely possible too.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. What do you think about the cost of these sakes? Are they worth it compared to the bargain brews that we had last week? What's your thought on the cost?
Oh, Tim. All right. So this is the $110 question.
Or the $138
question. I could buy 5 bottles of Tatsumigura for the cost of this sake. And this sake is wonderful. It is it's hard for me to express how that is special. It is a different, unique experience. Is it worth 500% more than this sake I tasted last week that was light, delicious, easy drinking, on paper, all the things I want in a sake? Probably not. I'd say it's probably not worth 5 bottles of something else that's really delicious. Now, these are extremes, right? We're dealing with something that was very inexpensive versus something that is very expensive. And in my life, I tend to try to find the happy middle ground. I try to find the balance between price and for lack of a better term, performance. And I think that this Dewa Zakura, it's wonderful, amazing sake for a very high price point. You get diminishing returns at a certain point. And I don't know if I'm the kind of person that's going to be like, oh, I need to spend $110 every time I want to have that experience. I might try to find something. I'm definitely going to try to find something lower. I try to find something somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I think we can both agree, though, that for a special occasion, this is really compared to wine, this is a tremendous value.
Yeah.
At fine dining restaurants in Manhattan, you can, without batting an eye, you can spend $500 on a bottle of wine.
Oof. Maybe you.
No. Yeah. And I think that for 20% of that cost, spending $100 instead on a bottle of sake like you or I have today, that is a tremendous value compared to where the wine world can go as far as cost is concerned. So if you look at it that way, we're both getting a super deal.
Yeah. It's not so bad.
So I think we can both say that expensive sakes taste pretty darn good as a rule, don't you think?
Yes, I love that our takeaway is, hey, expensive sakes are delicious. They are wonderful.
Well, for a special occasion, I think it's really worth it. You don't have to drink sakes like this every day, but to have a special experience, if it brings value to your dinner, to your time with friends, and you take the time to really savor an expensive sake with people you care about, really enjoy the experience, I think it's absolutely worth it.
I think on occasion, I think you're absolutely right. I think I can't let this become too much of a habit because it's an expensive habit to have.
Yeah.
But a delicious one to be sure.
Yep. Well, it was fun. It was pricey. It was fun.
Definitely both of those things.
I want to thank our listeners so much for tuning in. We really do hope that you're enjoying our show. Now, if you'd like to show your support for Sake Revolution, one way you can really help us out would be to take a couple of minutes and leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts. It's one of the best ways for us to get the word out about our show.
And also make sure that you please tell your friends about our show. Get them to subscribe on their podcast platform of choice. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, but I know you already do. And this way, every episode that we do every week will magically show up on your device of choice because we don't want you missing a single episode.
And as always, if you'd like to learn more about any of the topics or any of the sakes we talked about in today's episode, be sure to visit our website, sakerevolution.com, for all the detailed show notes.
And if you have a sake question that you need answered, we want to hear from you. Reach out to us. The email address is feedback@sakerevolution.com. So until next time, please remember to keep drinking all that bougie sake and kampai.